Hello and greetings. My name is Dr. Tim McGuinness. I am the managing director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, also known as the SCARS Institute. We are a government registered nonprofit organization based in the United States, Mexico, Europe, and having partners in more than 90 countries around the world, including, I'm proud to say, our partners in West Africa, such as the Ghana Safer Internet Foundation, which is doing an amazing job. I've been asked to talk to you today about two significantly pressing problems. First has to do with how do we disrupt the growth of the criminal community engaged in scams, fraud, and cybercrime. The other is the professionalization and expansion of victims advocacy in Ghana and elsewhere in West Africa. Our organization, the SCARS Institute, is dedicated to the mission of helping, assisting, advocating for, and providing support and recovery services for scam victims worldwide, in every country around the world, with the exception of Iran and North Korea. Because the fact is that the criminals that engage in these activities victimize individuals in virtually every country, including your own. While it may not be as obvious because the global press doesn't pay attention to this, there are almost as many local victims to these criminals as there are foreign victims. So this is a pressing problem for your country as well as countries around the world. I myself, I'm not a psychologist, I'm an anthropologist. I've spent years studying and evolving the science of psychology as it relates to traumatized crime victims, based on the work of organizations like NICA, BM, and the National Institutes of Mental Health in the United States. I am also a student in neuroscience. So I'm going to talk to you on many subjects. I hold 2 PhDs and I hold 6 master's degrees plus a Bachelor of Science. I guess you would say I am an expert in the subject matter. And I hope that you will listen to what I have to say and be able in some way to apply it into your own sphere of activities and find ways to utilize what we know and what others know in helping to turn individuals away from a life of criminality and also be able to expand professionalism in victims advocacy in your country. And in fact, my hope is that through presentations like this one, that universities such as the University of Kumasi and others will create formal curriculum on how to develop victims advocacy as a profession, coupled with the psychological sciences, to aid those in your country who have been traumatized by crime, whether it's a crime of violence, a financial crime, a political crime, or others. The truth is, financial crimes are a crime of violence. It's no different than walking up to someone with a gun, putting it in their face and demanding their money. The net effect of financial crimes, whether they're on the internet, whether they're by a phone call or a text message, is to deny someone who may be in desperate need of their money, their finances, and their ability to care for their family or their community or their future or their education. Financial crimes are every bit as much a crime of violence as any other form of crime. And don't be misled. Financial crimes kill people. Scammers are murderers. When they steal the life savings of an individual, wherever that individual may be, and that individual finds no future path or no way in which they can come to grips with this loss and takes their life, that is an act of murder. And many criminals are in fact mass murderers and should be viewed in this light. And we hope that criminal justice systems throughout the world acknowledge and recognize that financial crimes are in fact a crime of violence. It's a violation. The kind of betrayal trauma that victims experience, wherever they may happen to be, it doesn't matter what color, what race, what genetics, what country of origin. We are all human beings. We all share the same minds. We all experience trauma in the same way because we are all brothers and sisters. 60,000 years ago, approximately, maybe 65, maybe 70,000 years, the precise date is not known, the human species was reduced to 600 individuals planet-wide. We are all related. Some of us are more funny looking than others, but the fact is we're all brothers and sisters, regardless of how much melanin is in our skin. So we all share the same brains, and these brains evolved to react in very specific, identical ways. And that includes the ways in which we experience trauma. So, why am I speaking? Because my goal is to help you all understand both the importance of talking to individuals who are at risk of joining the ranks of these criminal organizations, which in reality are terrorists. What they do to their victims, what they do to their communities, what they do to their countries is nothing short of terrorism. But they are also human beings. And in that respect, they are deserving of our compassion and our understanding. We understand why individuals turn to crime. Economic opportunities are not what they need to be. But just imagine if all of these criminals turned their brilliance and their attention towards solving problems instead of creating them, instead of focusing on their own desires, justifications, rationalizations. They focused on solving the problems of their communities, their families, and their country. Just imagine what that could do for a country like Ghana or the others in West Africa or anywhere in the world. So let's first talk about victimization. I want to talk about two types of victims. One of them are the young men and women that turn towards a life of crime, because at that initial stage, they are victims. They are victims of an ideology which lies to them about how wonderful it's going to be to just do a few scams, make a few bucks, earn a bit of money for their family. Well, the reality is being a criminal is a traumatizing experience. Criminals are subject to something called vicarious trauma, which means as they traumatize others by their acts and deeds, that trauma infects them. And trauma is cumulative. The students in universities today and those throughout your country need to understand that criminality is a path to mental illness. It is a path to traumatization for themselves, which will affect their future, their minds, and their relationships with their families and friends. Once they start down that path, they need to abandon it as quickly as possible and do everything that they can, maybe not turning themselves in and facing prison time, but transforming what they have received into a force for good for their communities. Not by buying a new shiny house or a big car, but doing something worthwhile for their conscience, their soul, their God, and their country and community. The other type of victim I want to talk about are their victims, those who have been victimized through financial crimes, scams, fraud, cybercrime, and all of its thousands of variations. To engage in fraud against another human being is to deny their humanity, not only the humanity of the victim, but the humanity of the criminal as well. There is no deeper hell than those who destroy the lives of others. It is slow suicide for the criminals. But let's talk about their victims for a moment. Betrayal trauma is one of, if not the most horrific form of trauma that a victim can suffer from. Not only the betrayal of the criminal, but the betrayal of the society that is designed to protect them. When someone is scammed or defrauded, they lose their sense of safety. They lose their sense of community. They lose their sense of nationality. They withdraw. They may live in denial. They may live in anger. More likely, they will simply suffer in silence, because often families do not understand that being a victim of a scam or a fraud is something that we are all susceptible of because we are human beings. It's the way our brain works. And I'm not going to go into the neuroscience of this, but it is real. Everyone is susceptible to scams and frauds. Eventually, everyone will be scammed, will be defrauded. It's going to happen unless they are taught and learn to change their behaviors to prevent this. Behavioral change is the only way to avoid scams and fraud. If they continue to live with vulnerabilities, a denial of their susceptibility, it almost assures that it's going to happen. Advocacy needs to evolve to address the needs of victims, while at the same time doing its best to communicate with those that are at risk of becoming future criminals that what they're going to engage in is going to do real harm, not only to society, but to them and their family. And if they get caught, not only do they suffer, but the family will lose cars, properties, houses, because it was paid for with criminal assets. All right. So, in the process of providing peer counseling to students, I strongly urge you to be vocal about these topics. To be an advocate is to be an activist. Don't be afraid of offending. To be an activist is to engage in radical truth. What is radical truth? We all believe that we say the truth in one way or another, but often we equivocate, we minimize, we reduce it down to a non-offending form. But that isn't really truth. Those are little white lies that we tell other people and we tell ourselves to make it easier to get through our day. Radical truth means you tell the truth regardless. Because the fact is, if somebody's offended by it, it's not your fault. All you did was tell the truth. It's their fault for not being willing to hear and accept the situation the way it is. Now, psychologists, counselors, obviously must be practitioners of active listening, listening to what they are told. But also, counselors should have a mission to save the individual to the extent that they can. Again, I understand that psychologists are not there to save anybody. They're there to guide. Well, that's bullshit, frankly. Psychologists have a mission, have a, how do I put this? They have a necessity to help those avoid further suffering if they possibly can. Psychologists take the Hippocratic Oath just like doctors, and their oath is to do no harm. By remaining silent, you are doing harm. Be active in your communication with those that you're counseling. Let them know what the potential future can be for those who engage in criminality. So let's talk about the mental health issues, particularly for those who are victims of cybercrime, scams, and fraud. Trauma is the predominant effect of this experience. Victims will express this in shame, blame, guilt. They won't understand that it was not their fault, that everybody can be scammed. And as counselors, it's especially important to communicate that it is not their fault. They made a mistake, yes. And it's important to acknowledge this mistake because this allows the victim, survivor, something that they can forgive themselves for. What was that mistake? Their mistake was talking to a stranger, engaging in something that seemed sketchy, such as an opportunity to make quick money, because there is no free lunch, as the saying goes. But once they began talking, they lost control. They were being groomed, manipulated, and controlled. They literally lost control of their own mind because criminals learn to become consummate professionals at manipulation and control. And they learn the techniques of social engineering to lure people in, the grooming techniques to position them for deeper manipulation and control to get the victims to do what the criminal wants them to do. There is a great deal of science in what criminals do. They're not scientists, but they learn it both intuitively and through observing other criminals. And in some cases, there are manuals and guides that guide them along these paths. Victims don't understand this, and they need to be educated about it. This education can serve as both avoidance education, but the reality is, I'm sorry to say, avoidance education generally fails because no one believes that it will happen to them. I'm smarter, I'm too intelligent to fall for a scam. Intelligence has nothing to do with it. Dogs and cats can be scammed. Animals can be scammed. Human beings can be scammed. Monkeys can be scammed. It's hardwired into our brains. Once an appropriate social engineering lure has been presented, the amygdala picks up, it becomes hijacked, hyperactivated, and through this process of emotional manipulation, amygdala hijacking, for example, it diminishes the capacity of other mechanisms in the brain, other systems in the brain, to retain logical cognition. As the amygdala activates, the prefrontal cortex deactivates. Our reward system is hijacked. Our parietal temporal junction, which controls our beliefs, becomes deactivated and controlled by the emotional supercharging that takes place as a result of these processes. Afterwards, when they discover the scam, victims will believe, I saw the red flags, but I didn't act on them. No, they didn't. That's a cognitive bias called hindsight bias. Victims need to be educated about this experience because without that psychoeducation, they're unable to understand why it simply wasn't their fault and why they were unable to stop it. It's the job of counselors and advocates to help victims understand what has happened to them. Recovery doesn't come with time. Time doesn't heal these wounds. It helps, but it also allows for negative defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms to take control that lies to the victims about what really happened. It's necessary for victims to understand the full truth of what they experienced and learn both what happened, why it happened, how their brains functioned, how their minds betrayed them, and how to recover. This is a process of learning more than anything else. At the SCARS Institute, we have a free course that is available to you who are counselors and victims called our Scam Survivor School. It's a 13-week course that teaches victims exactly the things that I've just talked about. And you're welcome to take it. If you go to scarseducation.org, SCARS education.org, you can sign up for free. Normally, we charge for professional practitioners, but for you, it's absolutely free. And it's a 13-week course. It's self-paced. It allows you to learn from the perspective of a survivor. I encourage you all to sign up. We also will provide you with a certificate of completion and continuing education credits, and perhaps your universities will give you credit for taking our course. If not, you'll have a certificate that you can hang on the wall as psychological professionals or advocates, whichever the case may be. So understand that recovery from betrayal trauma is dependent upon the other traumas that the person has experienced in their life. Traumas are a stack of pancakes. And as a result, each traumatic experience is influenced negatively by the traumas that they have experienced in the past, as well as their personality types and other psychological characteristics, any disorders that they may have or experience, etc. It is not an overnight process. To characterize it generally, an individual will discover the trauma, or excuse me, discover the crime, and they will go through a period of either shock, denial, or anger immediately. That period lasts approximately 3 to 6 to sometimes 8 weeks. This is while the hormones and the neurotransmitters in their brain, which were hyperactivated, overflowing, so to speak, normalize. They will go through a period of cognitive dissonance. They will go through a period of cognitive impairment. Frankly, somebody who's been through trauma is not thinking right. Their brain doesn't allow them to. They experience what we call scam fog. It's a period of cognitive dissonance that lasts potentially for months. It depends on the victim's ability to accept the facts of what they've experienced. And it also depends upon their willingness to begin to let go of the shame, blame, and guilt. It takes approximately 6 months to go through that cycle in our experience. And we worked with approximately 11 million scam victims. So we have enough anecdotal data to know for certain from individuals around the world, from India, South Asia, Latin America, North America, Europe, etc. Victims of every religion, every culture, almost every country. Everybody is the same. Now, there are cultural differences. Some cultures have much deeper sense of duty, so the shame element is much more pronounced. Other individuals are much more hedonic and inclined towards entitlement and blaming others. But each individual is deserving of compassion and assistance in working through this. A peer-to-peer approach is helpful, but real therapy is necessary in combination with victim communities and learning in order to get a person through this. Recovery from these crimes is typically a multi-year journey, assuming that they do everything right. Here's the sad part. In our estimation, approximately 85% of victims will not recover from these crimes. And by recovery, I mean that they will not successfully learn to manage their trauma. They will not successfully go through the grief cycle to the point of acceptance. They will reach typically the anger or the negotiation phase and freeze there. About 50% of victims from the very beginning will stay trapped in denial. About 25% of them will lose themselves to anger in one form or another. Anger, rage, hate, or the detours into savior syndrome, messiah complex, and associated forms of attempts at imposing control on others. So mental health is the critical component in providing support and a pathway for recovery for victims. So in order to aid victims, it's necessary to develop programs that allow them to communicate amongst themselves in an expert moderated environment, because the truth is victims are not expert in any aspect of this. They're only expert in being victims. They need expert guidance, psychological more than anything else. They need a pathway to education. And we're going to work with our partners in West Africa to develop more culturally specific versions of our training programs that will help individuals make it through this process with the learning and behavioral changes that are necessary to become successfully recovered scam victims. Now, we all know that trauma is not something that is cured. Trauma is with you for life. But when we say successfully recovered, we mean that they have learned to manage their traumas and address not only the psychological but philosophical aspects of their victimhood to become true survivors. Now, let's also go back to the potential criminals. It's important to dissuade individuals, to disrupt the recruitment of criminals by talking to them honestly and openly about what this is going to do to them psychologically, morally, spiritually, and what it's going to do to their families and future relationships. But if we cannot prevent individuals from going into crime, what can we do to prevent them from being lifelong criminals? SCARS has developed two techniques that we believe are important. And we're talking to governments in your region about implementing these programs. The first is a diversion program, so that when individuals are identified as engaging in this criminality, instead of adjudicating them, taking them to court, convicting them, and throwing them in prison, we believe that there should be an opportunity, particularly for first-time individuals who have not engaged in it very long. And typically, it's the new criminals that get caught because they're not very good at it yet. We recommend that as national policy, these individuals be diverted to national service, specifically in the armed forces of a country. That they're not paid a salary, they're not given money, they're not allowed to have electronics, but that they do a term of service, typically 4 years. They're given food, they're given housing, they're given clothing, and they work to pay their debt to their society and their country. That activity of spending years in public service transforms them from a criminal mentality to a public service mentality. Many of them will then stay in the military as their career. Your country needs defense, particularly against the terrorist forces that are all around you. This is honest work and it's honorable work. And we believe that as many as possible should be diverted in this way, as long as they engaged in no other acts of violence or other criminality. Those who've gone into prison, unfortunately, are more likely to return to their former criminality. And this needs to be addressed as well. Solutions need to be found for ways in which these individuals can be refocused on honest, honorable, moral, meaningful work. And it may be that they become dedicated into industries that can absorb them, where they can live a moral life, such as agriculture, etc. So we would encourage you to look at ways in which those become opportunities. Going forward, we would encourage you all to visit our website, SCAMS, SCAMS, psychology, hopefully you know how to spell that, .org, scampsychology.org. This is our SCARS Institute manual on scam psychology, where we talk about everything that affects and afflicts victims, their trauma, cognitive biases, and everything related to these subjects. It's an expanding work, and we add to it constantly. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I hope that you have found some of the things that I've said to be useful and actionable, that you can apply them in your own studies and in your own learning and in your own processes in how you can meaningfully help the people of your own families, your own communities, your culture and country, that this somehow will be beneficial and that it can be a part of potentially the curriculum of your universities. Feel free to share this information. Feel free to contact us. You can reach us at contact@againstscams.org. We encourage you to visit our other websites like scams, SCAMS, now.com, as well as romancescamsnow.com. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today, and thank you very much to our local partners in West Africa, including the Ghana Safer Internet Foundation, doing an outstanding job. Thank you, and have a wonderful day, and we wish you all the best.